A little girl sees a millionaire man crying at his mother's grave. He says two words, and she turns pale. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The cool autumn breeze swept through Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, rustling the golden leaves that had begun to fall. The sky was a dull gray, mirroring the heavy weight in Lily's small chest as she walked along the cobblestone path. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, carefully picked from vacant lots near the shelter where she'd spent the previous night. The stems were wrapped in a piece of newspaper, a makeshift vase that was coming undone in her nervous grip. It had been exactly 1 year since her mother had passed away. Though time had dulled the initial shock, grief and loneliness still clung to Lily like a shadow. At 7 years old, she had learned to hide her tears, to stay quiet, and to make herself invisible when necessary. These skills had served her well in the shelters and temporary homes she'd drifted through since her mother's death. As she approached the familiar grave marker, Lily slowed her steps. Someone was already there, a man in an expensive suit kneeling before her mother's headstone. His broad shoulders were slumped, his head bowed as he placed a bouquet of white lilies at the base of the stone. Lily hesitated, clutching her wildflowers tighter. Who was this stranger at her mother's grave? In the years since the funeral, she had never seen anyone else visit her mother. Emily had always said it was just the two of them against the world. The man didn't notice her at first. She watched as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and heard the soft sound of his muffled sobs. There was something so private about his grief that Lily almost turned away, but this was her mother, her special day to remember her. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward. "What are you doing at my mom's grave?" she asked, her voice small but clear in the cemetery silence. The man startled, turning toward her with red-rimmed eyes. He was handsome in a stern way, with dark hair graying at the temples and a face that looked like it rarely smiled. For a moment, he seemed confused by her presence, blinking as if she might be a ghost. "Your mom?" he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. Lily nodded, pointing to the headstone. "Emily Wilson, that's my mom." The man's face paled as he stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. He stood slowly, towering over her small frame, his expensive coat fluttering in the breeze. "That's not possible," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Then, louder, "Emily Reynolds was my wife." Lily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Wife. Her mother had never been married, had never mentioned a husband. It was always just the two of them, moving from place to place, never staying long anywhere. "You're lying," she said, taking a step back. "My mom didn't have a husband." The man looked as shaken as she felt, his gaze moving between Lily and the headstone where the name Emily Wilson Reynolds was etched in elegant script, a name Lily had never seen in its complete form before. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Lily," she said, lifting her chin despite her trembling lips. "Lily Wilson, and I don't know who you are, but that's my mom." The stranger looked at her, as if seeing a ghost, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "I'm David Reynolds," he said finally, "and I think we both have a lot of questions." David stood there, the crisp autumn wind brushing against his face as he looked down at Lily. She wasn't crying anymore, but her small frame still trembled slightly in the chilly air. He had spent his entire life negotiating high-stakes deals, making multi-million-dollar decisions without a second thought. Yet here he was, frozen because of a little girl who claimed to be his wife's daughter. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Emily had never mentioned having a child, never once spoken about a daughter outside their marriage. But as David stared at Lily, he couldn't ignore the overwhelming feeling that she was telling the truth. There was something in her eyes, Emily's eyes, that couldn't be fabricated. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "Emily and I were married for 8 years. She never told me she had a daughter." Lily clutched her wildflowers tighter, her knuckles turning white. "And she never told me she had a husband," she replied, her voice small but defiant. They stood in painful silence, two strangers connected by a woman who had apparently kept them secret from each other. David noticed Lily's thin jacket, the worn-out shoes on her small feet, the tired circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept properly in days. "Where do you live, Lily?" he asked carefully. She hesitated, looking down at the ground. "Different places. I move around a lot." A cold realization settled over him. If she had no stable home, where had she been since Emily died? The thought made his stomach twist. "Who takes care of you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Lily shrugged, the gesture heartbreakingly adult for someone so young. "I take care of myself mostly. Sometimes people help for a while." David exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. The businesslike approach to crisis that had served him throughout his career kicked in, pushing aside his shock and confusion. Whatever was happening here, he couldn't leave this child, Emily's child, if she truly was Emily's child, alone in a cemetery with night approaching and temperatures dropping. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. Lily looked up, surprised by the question. She shook her head slightly. "There's a diner just outside the cemetery," he said, pointing toward the gates. "Emily used to like it. We could get something to eat and talk." He half expected her to refuse, to run away from this stranger claiming to be her mother's husband. Instead, after a moment's consideration, she nodded. "I'm hungry," she admitted. As they walked side by side down the winding cemetery path, David's mind raced with questions. How had Emily maintained two separate lives? Where had she told Lily she was going when she was with him? Who was Emily Wilson, and how did she differ from the Emily Reynolds he thought he knew? The diner was warm and busy, a welcome contrast to the cemetery's somber quiet. The hostess seated them in a corner booth, eyeing them curiously. The well-dressed businessman and the disheveled child made an odd pair. "Order whatever you like," David told Lily as she studied the menu with careful attention. "Can I have pancakes?" she asked, her voice tentative as if expecting him to change his mind. "Of course." When her food arrived, David watched as Lily ate with the focused determination of someone who didn't know when her next meal would come. Each bite revealed something new about her life. The careful way she cut her pancakes into small, manageable pieces, how she sipped her water between bites to make it last. "Lily," he said gently when she had slowed down, "I need to understand what's happening here. Where have you been living since your mother died?" She set down her fork, suddenly guarded. "Different places, shelters sometimes. Last night, I stayed at Good Shepherd on 4th Avenue. David felt something tighten in his chest. Anger, guilt, sorrow, he couldn't tell which. While he had been grieving in his empty brownstone for the past year, this child, who might be his stepdaughter, had been homeless. "What about other family?" he asked. "Grandparents, aunts, or uncles?" Lily shook her head. "Mom always said it was just us, that we only had each other." The same thing Emily had told him about her own background. Another lie in what was becoming a web of deception. "Lily," David said, meeting her eyes across the table, "I don't know what's going on yet, but I promise you this. You won't be sleeping in a shelter tonight." David barely slept that night, his mind tangled with thoughts he couldn't escape. The guest bedroom down the hall, which had stood empty since Emily's death, now housed a little girl who had turned his world upside down. After dinner, he had brought Lily to his brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a decision made impulsively but with conviction. He couldn't let Emily's daughter, if she truly was Emily's daughter, spend another night in a shelter. But now, staring at the ceiling as dawn approached, the full weight of the situation pressed against his chest. Had his entire marriage been a lie? How had Emily maintained two separate lives? And what was he supposed to do with a child he never knew existed? The sound of tentative footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. He rose quickly, throwing on a robe over his pajamas. When he opened his bedroom door, he found Lily standing there, looking small and uncertain in the oversized t-shirt he'd given her to sleep in. "I couldn't find a bathroom," she said quietly. "Second door on the right," David replied, pointing down the hall. She nodded and disappeared in that direction. David ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply as he moved to the kitchen, deciding to make coffee. He needed clarity, and caffeine seemed like a reasonable first step. By the time Lily emerged again, David had eggs and toast waiting. She approached the kitchen island cautiously, climbing onto a stool with careful movements. "You made breakfast?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. It's not much, David admitted. I'm not much of a cook. Mom wasn't either, Lily said, picking up a piece of toast. We ate a lot of cereal. The casual mention of Emily sent a jolt through David. This was his opportunity to understand more about the woman he thought he knew. Lily, he began carefully, sitting across from her, I need to ask you some questions about your mom, about Emily. Lily studied him for a moment before nodding. Okay, but then I get to ask you questions too. David couldn't help but smile slightly at her negotiation tactics. That seems fair. What do you want to know? She asked, taking a bite of eggs. Where did you and your mom live? Lily shrugged. Lots of places. We moved a lot. Mom said it was because of her work, but we never stayed anywhere more than a few months. And what kind of work did she do? David asked, intrigued. She restored paintings, fixed them when they got old or damaged. Sometimes she worked at museums, sometimes for private people. David's heart clenched. That part at least was true. Emily had been an art conservator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a fact he could verify. Did she ever mention me? He asked, the question burning inside him. Lily shook her head. No, she never said she was married. It was always just us. David took a sip of his coffee, using the moment to compose himself. When would she disappear? Were there regular times she wasn't with you? 3 days a week, sometimes 4, Lily said matter-of-factly. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. She said she had to work late those days, so I stayed with Mrs. Garrett from the apartment next door. The days aligned perfectly with when Emily had told David she was working late at the museum or volunteering at shelters. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His wife had constructed an elaborate double life with carefully crafted explanations for her absences on both sides. My turn, Lily said, interrupting his thoughts. How did you meet my mom? David took a deep breath, focusing on the simple facts rather than the emotions swirling beneath them. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was there for a fundraiser, and she was working late in the conservation studio. We literally bumped into each other in the hallway. Were you really married? Lily asked, her next question coming quickly. Yes, David said softly. 8 years. We had a small ceremony at City Hall, then a reception at our favorite restaurant. Did you love her? The directness of the question caught David off guard. He looked into Lily's eyes, so similar to Emily's, and couldn't bring himself to be anything but honest. Very much, he said. I thought I knew everything about her. Lily nodded, seeming to accept his answer. So did I. In that moment, a fragile connection formed between them. Two people struggling to reconcile their memories of Emily with the growing evidence that she had been a stranger to them both. What happens now? Lily asked, her voice small but steady. It was the question David had been asking himself all night, with no clear answer in sight. For now, he said, you'll stay here while I try to figure things out. Is that okay with you, Lily? She glanced around the spacious kitchen, then back at David. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. It's better than the shelter. David wasn't used to having someone else in the house. His mornings typically began with coffee and financial news, emails checked before sunrise, meetings scheduled back-to-back with military precision. But today, he found himself in a department store, standing awkwardly in the children's section while a saleswoman helped Lily select clothing. She needs everything, he had told the woman shortly after the store opened. School clothes, pajamas, proper shoes. The saleswoman had given him a curious look, but asked no questions about the disheveled child accompanying this clearly wealthy man. Lily approached clothing with the same careful consideration she seemed to give everything, examining tags, checking prices, selecting only the most practical items. When David encouraged her to choose things she actually liked, not just needed, she seemed genuinely confused. This is enough, she said, holding a small stack of basics. What about this? David asked, holding up a purple sweater with a subtle sparkle thread woven through it. Lily hesitated, then shook her head. It's not practical. Something about her response, so adult, so measured, made David's chest tight. What kind of life had forced a 7-year-old to worry about practicality over joy? We're getting it anyway, he said, adding it to the pile despite her protests. By midday, They had purchased not just clothes, but also a backpack, school supplies, and toiletries. David had called his assistant from the car, instructing her to research nearby elementary schools and arrange for immediate enrollment. If Lily was going to stay with him, even temporarily, she needed structure, stability, education. As they drove back to his brownstone, David glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing city, her small hand occasionally reaching up to touch the collar of her new coat, as if she couldn't quite believe it was hers. "Are you okay back there?" he asked. She nodded without looking away from the window. "Why are you doing all this?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean? Buy me stuff?" "Looking for schools." Now she turned to meet his eyes in the mirror. "You don't even know me." David considered his answer carefully. "You're Emily's daughter. That makes you important to me, even if I just found out about you. But she lied to you about me." "Yes," David admitted, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "She did. But that's not your fault." When they arrived home, David helped Lily put away her new clothes in the guest room. Now her room, at least for the foreseeable future. He watched as she carefully arranged each item, handling them with a reverence that spoke volumes about her previous scarcity. "I have some more calls to make," he said when they were finished. "Will you be okay on your own for a bit? There are books in the living room if you get bored." Lily nodded, and David retreated to his home office, closing the door behind him. The first call wasn't work-related at all. It was to a private investigator he sometimes used for vetting business partners. "I need information on an Emily Wilson, also known as Emily Reynolds," he explained, keeping his voice low. "Specifically, I need to verify her background, employment history, financial records, anything that might explain how she maintained two separate identities." "Sounds complicated," the investigator commented. "This related to business?" "It's personal and confidential," David said firmly. After ending the call, David sat at his desk, staring at the framed photograph of Emily that had occupied the same spot since her death. Her smile, once a source of comfort, now seemed enigmatic, concealing secrets he was only beginning to uncover. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Lily standing there, holding a leather-bound photo album. He recognized it immediately. The wedding album Emily had painstakingly assembled, filled with candid shots from their courthouse ceremony and intimate reception. "I found this," Lily said, her expression unreadable. "It's really her with you." David nodded, stepping aside to let her enter the office. "Yes, that's our wedding day." Lily sat in one of the chairs opposite his desk, carefully turning the pages of the album. "She looks happy," she observed quietly. "She was," David said, sitting beside her rather than behind his desk. "At least I thought she was." Lily traced a finger over Emily's smiling face in one of the photos. "She was happy with me too," she said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Even though we didn't have all this." David felt the implied criticism, but couldn't fault her for it. The contrast between his life with Emily and hers was stark. "I believe you," he said gently. "Your mother was complicated, it seems. But I never doubted her capacity for love." For the first time since they'd met, Lily's expression softened slightly. "Me neither. It wasn't much, this fragile moment of shared understanding." But as they sat together, looking at photographs of a woman who had connected and deceived them both, David felt it was at least a beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and tension. David worked diligently to ensure Lily's safety while grappling with the implications of Emily's hidden life. He arranged for extra security around the brownstone and kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, acutely aware that they were being monitored. One evening, as they settled into a routine, David noticed Lily sketching at the dining room table, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had taken up drawing as a way to process her emotions, depicting scenes from her past and the new life she was beginning to carve out with him. David watched her for a moment, marveling at her resilience. She was still just a child, yet faced with the gravity of their situation, she had adapted remarkably well. "Lily," he said gently, interrupting her focus. "Do you want to talk about anything? How are you feeling about everything?" She looked up, her big eyes reflecting a mix of innocence and maturity that tugged at his heart. "I'm okay," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. I just miss Mom sometimes. David nodded, understanding her pain. I miss her too, he admitted. There's so much I wish I could have asked her. Lily set down her pencil and pushed her drawings aside. Do you think she's watching over us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David felt a lump form in his throat. I like to think so, he said softly. I think she would want us to be safe and happy. In the days that followed, they spent more time together, forging a bond that was slowly replacing the initial confusion with a sense of familial connection. David found himself sharing stories about Emily, painting a picture of the woman he had loved, while Lily spoke of her memories, bits of laughter, moments of joy, the little things that made Emily unique. One afternoon, while they were preparing lunch, David decided to take a leap of faith. Lily, he said as he sliced vegetables, I know things have been really tough for you, and you've been through a lot. But I want you to know that you can always talk to me about anything. I'm here for you. She looked up from the table, her expression serious. Even if I have questions about my mom, especially if you have questions about your mom, he replied, his voice steady. We can figure this out together. Lily considered his words, her small fingers tracing the edge of the table. What if she was scared? What if she was trying to protect me from something? David paused, the weight of her question sinking in. That's exactly what I think. Your mom loved you very much, Lily. She wanted to keep you safe. You promise you won't let anything happen to me? She asked, her voice tremulous. I promise, he said firmly, meeting her gaze. We will face whatever comes our way together. As the days turned into weeks, they began to find their rhythm. David enrolled Lily in a nearby elementary school, and she quickly made friends, her laughter returning as she settled into her new life. Yet, despite the normalcy, David remained vigilant. He knew better than to let his guard down completely. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, watching a movie, David's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it, his heart racing as he recognized the contact. It was Mira, the cybersecurity expert he had hired to decrypt Emily's files. He excused himself and stepped into the kitchen to call her back. David, I have news, Mira said, her tone serious. I've completed the analysis of the files. There's a significant amount of evidence against Victor Klav's organization, including financial transactions and connections to several high-profile individuals. David felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. What does this mean for us? It means we can take this to the authorities. But it also means you need to be careful. Klav's people will be looking for any loose ends. David nodded, his mind racing with the implications. What I need to do? You need to secure the evidence and arrange a meeting with Agent Reeves. She's the best contact we have, but you must be discreet. They can't find out what you're planning. Understood, David replied, determination setting in. I'll make sure Lily stays safe. As he returned to the living room, he looked at Lily, who was laughing at something on the screen. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, a promise to protect this little girl who had unknowingly become the center of his world. We'll get through this, he whispered to himself, watching as Lily beamed at the screen, her laughter echoing in the room. They were in this together, and together they would find a way forward. 6 months later, the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights felt truly like home for the first time since Emily's death. The formal living room had been transformed with colorful throw pillows and a child-sized art desk by the window. Framed drawings hung alongside fine art on the walls, and Lily's work proudly displayed as Emily would have wanted. David stood in the doorway, watching as Lily arranged flowers on the coffee table. White lilies, Emily's favorite. Today marked 18 months since her passing, their second cemetery visit together. Ready? He asked softly. Lily nodded, carefully adjusting the final bloom. Do you think she'd like these? She'd love them, David assured her. The drive to Greenwood Cemetery was peaceful, so different from their first meeting in this place. Klav was back in prison, his organization dismantled by the evidence Emily had painstakingly gathered. Catherine Reeves had kept her promise, protecting them through the investigation and legal proceedings, ensuring their safety as the case concluded. They walked together along the familiar path, Lily's hand comfortably in David's, their steps in natural rhythm. The headstone had been changed now, reading Emily Wilson Reynolds with the addition of Sarah Cassidy in smaller letters beneath it, acknowledging all parts of the remarkable woman who had connected them. Lily placed the lilies gently at the base of the stone, while David stood quietly beside her. After a moment, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the silver locket, now empty of its secret, but no less precious. "I think Mom would be happy now," she said, running her thumb over the engraved heart. "We're not in danger anymore. We're together." David knelt beside her, adjusting his tie, the same one he'd worn to court last month when the adoption was finalized. "I think you're right." They stayed a while longer, sharing memories of Emily that had become easier to discuss with time. The pain had softened, making room for understanding and even forgiveness for the impossible choices she had made. As they walked back toward the cemetery gates, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, Lily looked up at David with Emily's eyes and a face that was increasingly showing her own unique spirit. "Thank you for finding me," she said simply. David smiled, his heart full. "No, Lily, thank you for finding me." Together, father and daughter by choice rather than blood, they stepped from the place of memories into the promise of their shared future, the most valuable legacy Emily had left behind.